And just to start off with the World Health Organization's definition of health, and this has been the same since 1946, excuse me, and that is health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So, and it's important that we look at all these aspects of it. So health is not just not having a disease or being unwell. It is about having good well-being. And so what has been interesting over the past number of weeks is like there's been all these warranted actions taken by individuals, by families, by communities, businesses, governments to prevent deaths because we have this communicable or this contagious disease caused by a virus. It directed us to start listening to the World Health Organization and public health specialists to for best guidance on how we are going to deal with this rapidly spreading disease. And we turn to the people who have been trying to tell us this for the last number of years. And up until now, we've had a very, very slow response and investment in action. There has been some people have absolutely embraced it, but it has been slow in other places. And that's if all citizens in the EU aged between 20 and 74 cycled or walked for an additional 15 minutes a day, just 15 minutes a day, 100,000 premature deaths could be prevented each year. So when we think of the actions that we have taken to save thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths recently, and how we've all acted as as a group on that, and the relative little that we've been done, which could have had a massive impact as well. And this behaviour has changed. People have started walking more. So this is a press release, part of a press release that was done by Sport Ireland yesterday, or released by them yesterday. Now, Sport Ireland do physical activity research. This is not just participation in sport, it is also physical activity. And they've seen there's been a massive increase, and a consistent increase throughout the research they've been doing in the last few weeks. And the figure of 83% is the highest ever level recorded amount of people walking. So that's the equivalent to 3.1 million regular walkers in Ireland. And it's the lowest level of inactive people in the history of Sport Ireland research as well. So we are now more active as a nation. And in that activity, most of that activity is happening within a 2 and now 5 kilometre radius of our homes. So we're becoming much more familiar with our local areas, we call it our spatial geography. We're learning where things are in our communities, and we're having incidental meetings with people. So we're seeing more people in our communities as well, more connected to our communities. And this is really important when we think back on that definition of health, and also the health of the economy and our local economies. We're now more familiar with the businesses in our neighborhoods and what we can access. And this was my really crude attempt at trying to summarize what epidemiologists are going to be studying for the rest of this century. Is it like this, we wasn't just lives saved from COVID, as I've just mentioned, that we in Ireland, it is thought that 14% of all premature deaths are due to physical inactivity, 5% of premature deaths due to air quality, and loneliness. Now, this is an international number. They estimate that up to 25% of global deaths can be attributed to loneliness. Now, there's been a lot of narrative around how people are lonelier at the moment. Some people, that they're not in work, not meeting as many people, but there are also people who are meeting more people within their communities as well, and spending more time with their family, their direct family. So it'll be interesting to see how that play out. And just to kind of give an indicator, in 2017, so cardiovascular disease, cancers, lung disease, and suicides attributed to 64% of all deaths in Ireland. And road traffic, and they're all linked to physical activity, air quality, loneliness. And road traffic accidents were just 0.5%. Now, it was 0.5% too many. But when we think about how we often attribute it being not safe enough to cycle or walk, and the fear of those accidents or incidents that they're incidents, not accidents, I should say, that maybe we should think a little bit more about the all case scenario. So we were very quick to act on the prevention of a disease when we feared for our lives. There was an immediate danger, and we felt like a major threat to our own lives and the lives of loved ones from COVID-19. But non-communicable diseases are often referred to as lifestyle diseases. People don't conjure up the same urgency, so we don't tend to act as immediate about it. So, and hopefully a learning that we take from all of this is that we can save hundreds of thousands more lives by taking action, an action that has happened to facilitate movement as we recover from COVID. But we have to also remember and be very aware that we are up against we have an underfunded public health system and health promotion system. There's investment in active travel and walking, cycling, and public transport carries a high burden of proof. We are expected to jump through the hoops to prove why it is important, and we're up against big budget marketing companies when it comes to when it comes to promotion, advertising, and influence. So this is a document from the WHO that I just want to bring people's attention to in case that they may not be familiar with it. And it's called Towards More Physical Activity in Cities, and it is equally relevant for villages, towns, and any conglomerate of houses or space or any village setting. And just to show there's many multiple influences on physical activity. So what is walkability? And I'm going to do this really quickly summarize what it is. What makes an area walkable? What is walkability? And it is a village or a neighborhood or a community. A walkable village or community is somewhere where you can access all of these services in a walk from your home, or you could easily walk or get there. But and that it's built at a human scale, so you feel like you belong. It was built around a human, and this is typical of places that were built before the 1940s, when people didn't have cars, and there was an assumption nobody had a car, and that's how we built it. And here, I love this diagram that just shows quite clearly the difference between, on the bottom half, we have that well-connected neighborhood, that very walkable, connected neighborhood, versus what we've been building, particularly in Ireland since the 1960s, but absolutely since the construction boom in the 2000s as well. And what I refer to that as is cararchitecture, where places were built on the assumption that everybody has a car. And these are isolated spaces that pedestrians and cyclists feel quite isolated. Ironically, there's a lot of provision of services here for them, right? So a lot of footpaths, we have a lot of cycle paths, but they're not pleasant to use. They're good for your commute. They'll get you on your commute faster. But if you're trying to access services in your community and get to school, etc., it's not necessarily a very comfortable and safe space. Cars are moving faster. You're moving much slower relative to them. And people can feel quite vulnerable. The two pictures on the right are two solutions people have to overcome bad connectivity, using a shopping trolley to jump a wall and knocking down fences. And these are indicators of where there's opportunity for more. This slide just shows, it's a replication of a study that was first done in San Francisco in the 1980s and was redone in Bristol in 2008. And it just shows how the more traffic there is in a neighborhood, how it influences how many of your neighbors that you know. Permeability. So we talk about connectivity, but permeability, that's the perception of how easy it is to move through your area. So just because you have well-connected streets doesn't mean people feel safe and can move through them easily. They don't always feel safe. And you know, when we just provide it for a small infrastructure for a small minority, it's not, we won't get many people using it. When we design it with everyone in mind, we'll get much more people using it. The streetscape is important, but it's also important that we have somewhere to go to engage in recreation. Public transport is important because we need to be able to link from our village or neighborhood to others. Sorry, I'm looking at the time here. That we also then, you know, just to be aware of the skills base that we have in our local authorities that are delivering these. So the urban designer has a better knowledge of the space. The traffic engineer has a better space and place, and the traffic engineer has a better knowledge of the movement elements. And we have to give consideration to both of these. So we have to work together in teams. But a lot of the decisions made about what we need and how what we should deliver are made by senior officers and influenced by politicians. And as you see here, that their general awareness and details, they've more of a general awareness than detailed skills. And then here I'll put in this slide around the stages of behavior change, because we have a massive opportunity now, because when we're trying to get behavior change in relation to active travel and physical activity. There's a whole process of breaking habits and then encouraging nudges, and before we get people to actually participate, right? So you can see there's 4 steps there before people even try something new. There's a long process of getting used to the idea and preparing for it. We have gotten to that step 4 as a result of what has been happening over the last few weeks. That people have been getting out and walking, they have been getting out and cycling in their droves. We have had safer streets, we've gotten more of the physical infrastructure there. So what's really important now is that we work to sustain this behavior change that has already started and continue to nudge people to continue to change their behavior for the benefit of everybody's health, the health of the environment, and the environment and everything else. So moving forward, I'm just saying that it's really important that we build rapport and trust with the other stakeholders, and we make time for that. So those that are involved in the delivery of this. Listen to local knowledge. There's lots of different reasons why people don't walk in particular neighborhoods and areas, and engage with that and understand that, and recognize that people have real and genuine fears, and like work with them. Understand and discuss everyone's roles within your team. Know the boundaries and limitations of your knowledge and expertise, and don't be afraid to ask and acknowledge that. Important point I want to make is responsibility in the media. Media do love to get a soundbite. They do love to get a bit of confrontation going, and they have a responsibility for our national public health to be responsible in how they report this. And we also have to see that what is delivered needs to be a viable and attractive option for people who want to use it. Okay, sorry, Kieran, I've gone a little bit over there.
No, you're fine. You're fine,
yeah.
Lorraine.
Yeah. Okay, so that's me done.
That's brilliant. I think there's lots of food for thought on that. And it was really good just to see the challenges we have in terms of the skills base that's out there and how we move forward on this. So our next speaker is Sheila Gannon, who joins us from Ennis in County Clare. Sheila works with Fluid Edge Cycling and Walking Research, and she's also a co-founder of Better Ennis. And she is going to talk to us about the impact of the public realm on public health and communities in COVID-19. Sheila, you're very welcome this evening.
Thanks, Kieran, and thank you very much for organising all this. I'll just share my screen. Great, so my name is Sheila Gannon, and just to give you a little bit of background on me, my background is in physiotherapy from University College Dublin. I worked in respiratory, cardiac care and ICU in the Mater Hospital in Dublin, which is a large acute hospital. I then worked in New Orleans in Tulane University Hospital in the area of orthopedics and rehabilitation. And then I took a detour into technology and co-developed Liberty Bell with Conor Cahill. Liberty Bell is a research platform for walking and cycling insights. We've been involved in a number of research projects to date, including Safe Routes to School for walkability and cyclability with Antashka Green Schools and Eco Schools programme, and Cycling and Gender in Dublin with volunteers from the Dublin Cycling Campaign. And we're working on an age-friendly walkability audit with Clare County Council. And I've been lucky enough to speak at WHO International Healthy Cities in Belfast, Smart Cities in Barcelona, and Velo City in Rio, where I met Kieran, and Velo City in Dublin. And as Kieran said, I'm here in County Clare, which for our European neighbours is in the west of Ireland, and I'm in the county town, which is Ennis. It's a small town by any standards, although the largest town in Munster, of 25,000, and it's located between the cities of Limerick and Galway, close to Shannon Airport. And Ennis means Innis. Innis is the Irish word for Ennis, which means island, and it's situated on the River Fergus. And it's well known for its shop fronts, very colourful streets, its love of traditional music, and that's where I found myself during the lockdown, so no better place to be. So Better Ennis is a very recently organised, recently founded community group And our focus is really on helping improve Ennis to have happy and healthy streets. And it crosses a number of different sectors: active travel, age friendliness, accessibility for all, air quality, placemaking. And we're a small group of health professionals, teachers, business owners, and we aim to be a positive, non-partisan community group because we believe in the importance of yes. Very often the no's can be heard loudest, and we believe on being solution focused and building allies and bridges with the business community, with our fellow residents and visitors to the town, with our elected representatives, and with the Clare County Council, which will be our local authority. So the title of this webinar is The Challenges and Opportunities during the pandemic. And one of the main challenges for our public realm is to allow for physical distancing. And the physical distancing allows for good public health and safety, but there is an opportunity in that for our collective public health. And Lorraine has alluded to this already, that we've managed to make that climb to number 4 in behaviour change, in that we've seen so many people walk and cycle and embrace active travel within Ennis over the pandemic. So the first campaign of Better Ennis is actually an open letter to our local authority, and we were inspired by other grassroots movement around the country, from Sligo and Galway and Limerick and Cork to Maynooth and Wexford and everyone in between. And essentially the grassroots movement is looking for the reallocation of space so that people can walk and cycle safely and maintain physical distancing in a safe manner on our streets. And obviously there's commonalities across a lot of different groups around the country, and this is not just unique to Ireland. Across Europe, there's requests and implementation of reduction in speed limits, as Kieran mentioned, filtering through traffic, automating pedestrian crossings and prioritising pedestrians. There's commonalities in asking for wider footpaths to accommodate physical distance and the implementation of temporary cycle lanes. But as Lorraine said, it's important to engage locally, and it is really good to tailor each grassroots movement to what is unique to a particular place. It's a fundamental of placemaking to work from the ground up, and it's important to retain the unique character of towns. There was a photo there in Lorraine's presentation of Clonakilty, which I adore, which is managed with incredible changes to the public realm, still managed to retain its beautiful character, and not only the unique character of the towns, but of the people who live there too. And particular local issues we have in Ennis, one is air quality, and in winter time, Ennis breaches a number of the recommended limits. A lot of that is due to smoky coal, but we know that air quality as a result of traffic emissions has an adverse effect on people who have respiratory conditions. So this is my lovely and very friendly neighbour Marie, who has COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And it's important that we realise that this is an opportunity now for improving the quality of our air through our towns and our cities. So COVID-19, we know as a virus, causes acute respiratory distress, and people who suffer from respiratory conditions are more vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19. So it's important, as those people recover from the virus and those who are already vulnerable to it have as good a quality as air in their environment as possible. And it's important too that we include all ages and people of all abilities. Our streets in Ennis are quite narrow. They're not the most accessible for people using mobility aids or people using wheelchairs. And it's important that as we intervene and improve our streets for physical distancing, that we make sure that we allow for all ages and abilities. So Clare County Council have implemented the Ennis Mobility Plan, the first stage of it, and they have to be complimented on that, because because of the timeliness of their mobility plan, they implemented it very quickly, recognizing the need to allow for physical distancing. A lot of our streets are very narrow, so it's important to accommodate people queuing for shops, to allow for businesses to expand into open public spaces, and to allow people to move about safely. However, it's important that that is continuously evaluated and improved on, so that the implementation of it is best practice. And we would appeal for inclusion, for the improvements we make to allow for physical distancing in the public realm, to make sure that they accommodate people of all ages, all abilities and all genders. It's really important to emphasize that disabled people walk and cycle too. So we need to accommodate within, for example, our cycle lanes, we need to accommodate hand cycles, trikes. We need to remember that people may not have an outwardly visible disability, and to accommodate everyone within our public realm. And so too, a lot of people are prescribed exercise for recovery, not only from COVID-19, but a wide variety of other conditions. For example, cardiac rehab, a prescription will be to walk for hip replacements or knee replacements. People will be encouraged to walk or cycle respectively. And it's important, for example, if we're providing seating, that, for example, if somebody has had a hip replacement or is an older person with osteoarthritis, they might find it too difficult to sit down on a lower seat and need seat arms to push up back into standing. And this lady is a member of the Older People's Council, and I worked with a number of volunteers. We did a walkability audit in Ennis town alongside Clare County Council. Unfortunately, there's not enough seating in the town. We hope that this will improve, and this is something that is part of the campaign, or Better Ennis's campaign. So she's taking a rest there on a little electrical box. And we do see a lot of opportunities ahead, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. One of the opportunities we've seen that has arisen out of the tragedy of the pandemic is that public health is in the limelight. And public health can mean two things. It's our collective public health, as Lorraine discussed, and it's also discipline in medicine in its own right. I always find it entertaining that a lot of people now know our chief medical officers, our national officials in public health by their first names, that we've become so familiar with their messages and their advice over the pandemic. And it's important not only to improve our physical health and mental health and maintain that during the pandemic, but also maybe this is our time to realize that we need to improve the health of our population, our resilience as a population. And other opportunities is remote working. So I'm quite used to working from home, but it's great to see how that's been embraced across the country. And that balanced regional growth has taken pressure off public transport, it's taken pressure off traffic congestion too. It has the potential to take massive, create a massive opportunity by revitalising our rural towns and villages and our other cities outside of Dublin. But I think the number one opportunity that we've taken away from the pandemic is empathy. We see how through physical distancing and our older people cocooning and our need to self-isolate to a certain extent, we now, I think, truly appreciate the value of social interaction. And I think that gives us a great empathy with people who are socially isolated outside of the pandemic in their normal life. And we're asking Better Ennis and a lot of the grassroots around the country that people who can, that they allow and they push for a public realm and active travel infrastructure that will allow us to stay connected and to combat social isolation and to really emphasize that value of social interaction, so we can nod and say hello and say hi and smile at our neighbours and fellow residents in our community. Thank you.
Sheila, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Sadly, I don't have an applause button. I think I have a clap meeting, but I think we all were really impressed with that presentation. Along with Lorraine, you had fantastic slides. And I think in focusing on the health aspects of the crisis and the importance of clean air, you've opened up the gateway to making enhancements happen in our urban areas. And I certainly was hugely impressed with that. I'll move on. Our next speaker is Jill Warren from the European Cyclists Federation. Before I do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, you can submit them in the Q&A box at either the top or the bottom of your screen. And you can also use the chat function to share with everybody who is in the room. And we have a huge amount of participants, a huge amount of people in the audience tonight. So Jill is the CEO, the joint CEO, the co-CEO of the European Cyclists Federation, and is going to give us a European Cycling Federation perspective on the pandemic. The ECF is a Brussels-based NGO that promotes cycling as a sustainable and healthy means of transport and leisure in Europe. Jill is both a US and a Dutch national and has spent the last 30 years living and working in Frankfurt, London, and Brussels. Her strong passion for cycling attracted her to the ECF, and she is an avid everyday and recreational cyclist who enjoys exploring the world by bike on cycling holidays. Jill, you're very welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Kieran. Delighted to be here. So thank you for the introduction. So you've heard that the European Cyclists Federation is an NGO who promotes cycling as a sustainable and healthy means of transport and leisure. So we are the voice of cyclists throughout Europe, working for more, better, and safer cycling. We're an umbrella organization representing 74 member organizations in 47 countries. We have an Irish organization in our network, cyclists.ie, which I hope many of you are familiar with. ECF gains greatly from having cyclist.ie as one of our members, and hopefully vice versa. Dr. Damien Otwama in that organization is a vice president and member of ECF, member of our board since 2016. So Damien, if you're watching today, hi, a shout out to Damien.
He signed up, so I hope he is out there somewhere.
Good. Okay. Just to talk a bit about what ECF is calling for in this debate and what we see as the opportunities and what we'd like to see happen. You know, ECF clearly wants citizens and decision makers to grasp the opportunity presented by the pandemic to improve public space and mobility in urban areas around Europe. And there's never been a better time, I think, to push for a new normal in that sense. So the benefits of more cycling to the environment, to public health, and to well-being are enormous, and we've heard a lot about that in the first two presentations. Given that 74% of Europeans live in urban areas, according to Eurostat, that means a huge number of people stand to benefit from any improvements we make to create more public space and better sustainable mobility conditions in our cities and towns. So in a post-COVID world, we see cycling as essential, not only to easing congestion on public transport and our roads and maintaining social distancing, but in driving a truly green recovery. The empty, deserted streets that we all saw in the last couple of months, but also the crowded sidewalks where people had to queue at a safe distance from one another to get into shops to buy food, highlighted just how much public space in our cities is devoted to cars, and comparatively how little space is devoted to cyclists and pedestrians. So we really need to change that if we want to have truly sustainable and livable cities going forward. So ECF has published 4 categories of recommendations that we hope municipalities, regions, and countries can take inspiration from to help unlock more of cycling's potential. So those include the creation of cycling infrastructure networks, the reduction of traffic speed limits, incentives for positive change and disincentives for business as usual, and encouraging more cycle logistics. So I'll say a few words about each of these. So ECF has called for the creation of cycling infrastructure networks, such as the pop-up cycle paths we're seeing. We have announced a target of 95,000 kilometers of roads to be repurposed for cycling. So we heard at the very beginning from Kieran that lots of cities like Berlin, Brussels, Budapest, Milan, Paris, Rome, and many others are very prominent examples of cities doing these things, but there are also many others. The picture here is the Rue de la Loi, or the Wetstraat in Brussels, probably the busiest street in Brussels, normally 4 lanes of traffic across. 1 lane has been repurposed as a dual cycle path recently. And of course, I was one of the first to check it out and take a picture of it. But really nice to see things like this happening in cities that are so designed for cars. So we've also called on the EU institutions to provide 2 billion euros in funding for COVID lanes and this kind of infrastructure. But we've also called for an additional 5 billion in EU funding for permanent infrastructure. We really hope that these pop-up lanes and some of this temporary infrastructure really is going to become permanent. So reduction of traffic speed limits is really important, of course, for people to feel safe walking and cycling in our cities. So speed is one of the major threats to our safer streets. And we know that reducing traffic speed to 30 kilometers per hour or lower is the first step. And in most places, it doesn't even make overall mobility any slower when you do that. Nice example in Brussels, the pentagon-shaped inner ring road. Everything within that has now been turned into 20 kilometers per hour slow streets with cyclists and pedestrians having priority. And again, boy, wouldn't that be nice if that's kept way beyond the provisional few months that's foreseen for right now. So the third recommendation, we want to incentivize positive change. It really does make a difference in terms of nudging people towards different behaviors. So together with the cycling industry, we've called for a centralized EU e-bike access fund. E-bikes have the potential to really revolutionize mobility. They're a fantastic green alternative to motorized transport. They extend the range that a lot of people would normally be willing to travel by bicycle. They open up cycling to many more people of all ages. And I think there's a fairness point here too. If there's going to be subsidies and incentives and help for the automotive industry, or even for electric vehicles in particular, I think we can't leave this form of mobility out of the picture. We've also recommended other subsidy schemes, such as what Italy's done for a bicycle purchase scheme, or what France has done in terms of introducing 50 euro vouchers for people to have bikes repaired. Those are we see almost an immediate return in terms of people taking advantage of this to purchase bikes or have them repaired or whatever, so that really can get things going in a strong way. Disincentives can also work. So what can we do to get people out of cars? Congestion charges is something people would typically think of. Would that encourage people to walk or cycle, particularly if, as in many cities, the typical distance of a trip is less than 5 kilometers? Also, things like less parking spaces for cars can make a difference there. Our last recommendation concerns cycle logistics. There's huge potential for last mile delivery to be done by cargo bikes or e-cargo bikes in cities. That eliminates a lot of the congestion that delivery vehicles and things normally cause, and the pollution associated with that. So, we think there too, there's a lot more potential, and what can we do to encourage more of that? So just to sum up, what what we've talked about in terms of recommendations, yes, they require, when it's all put together like this, it looks like massive investments, but actually this is still much cheaper than incentivizing car purchase or any of that. And we think that this is really the right way to encourage more cycling and have the right conditions to do that. This picture here is another pop-up cycle path in Brussels, right across the street from my house. I was completely delighted when I saw them doing this. I ran out, was talking to the men putting those barriers and things in the street, and I said, thank you, and they said, yeah, nobody ever comes and thanks them. Usually they're swearing at them for what they're doing, but must be nice to be doing those these days for the cyclists who welcome that. That is all for me. So thank you, Ginnane, very, very much for the opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you, Jill. That was a fantastic presentation. And I just love those last two slides of showing that there is action happening on the ground. And then that bit of green space on the bike at the end was absolutely, absolutely lovely. So we're moving on to our final speaker this evening. We have Maria Vassilakou with us. Maria is with Vienna Solutions. She's the former vice mayor of Vienna, and she's going to talk about COVID-19 as an opportunity to reimagine cities. Maria was born and grew up in Athens. She studied linguistics and psychology in Vienna, and since 1996 has been active in Viennese city politics. Was head of the Green Party there from 2003 to 2019. And for almost 10 years, up until last year, was the vice mayor with an amazing list of responsibilities: urban development and planning, mobility, climate protection, energy planning, and city involvement. I got to know Maria when we were studying in London last year, and she is currently working as an independent urban consultant, focusing on urban transformation strategy, process design, and transition management. She is the founder of the Urbanists and Practitioners Network, Vienna Solutions, sharing best practices and know-how from Vienna with cities across the globe. So, Maria, you are very welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. And Ginnane, thanks for the nice introduction and for inviting me to be part of this. I will start sharing and hope that this will work. Now you should be all able to see the presentation. Is that so?
Maria, I can. I see it seems like we've two images, a smaller one in the center. So perhaps if you go full screen on your PowerPoint.
Let me see. Is that better?
Not quite yet. That's much better now. That's almost full screen. So yeah, I can see the thumbnails of the slides on the left and that beautiful main image taking up most of the screen.
Okay. I would say let's just use this.
Let's work with that. It's good. It's clear. Yeah.
It's better than losing time. So, once again, what I have chosen to show as first is a picture of old times, so that we don't forget about the cities that we love, and where we're going back to, because I do believe that in the post-COVID era, not everything is going to be staying the way it is right now. Anyway, we were all sent to lockdown, and some people had good luck. They lived in Vienna, and this is where we spent lockdown, most of us, most of the time, because we never went into a total lockdown. So you were allowed actually to leave the heart of the city and actually go to the hills. And I really mean this. This is actually a typical picture of what happened during the lockdown in Vienna. But now the lockdown is over. So if we take a look to the city downwards, downhill, we're returning there. And what is the world going to be like in the next months and years? Downhill. So what now? Now, there are, I think, two main discussion groups, let's put it this way, two approaches. One of them means that this is the future of mankind. I mean, I am really meaning to be provocative right now. I think that by pathologizing public space, and for one reason, also by having spent a few months in lockdown, many people believe that this is actually the way they should be spending the rest of their lives. They should have a little home in the countryside, they should have a little garden around their house, and this is where, you know, the world is as it should be, it is healthy, no foreigners, no other people around, it's just the way life should be. Now, if you go about it this way, this is where you end. And everybody has been also talking about, does this mean the return of private car use? Does it mean we all return into our cars? Well, I can say if this is what it means, this is what the city looks like, actually in a couple of months from now, which is clearly what we all do not want to have. And maybe one last provocative thesis for introduction. Many people have been already started to talk about the drive-in city. I mean, I have even heard about drive-in supermarkets, drive-in weddings, drive-in cinemas. I don't think that this is actually the future of mankind. Because once again, if this is the future of mankind, this is where it leads. What you can here see is actually a picture I took in Beijing a few months ago. It is where they, it's the center of the heart of Beijing's control center for mobility. So you can have, you know, it looks like enterprise, doesn't it? So you can have really millions of cameras everywhere around the city, and you can have real-time data and big data and everything. But in the end, you really cannot fight congestion, and you can't create a city that we all love to live in on this basis. So to start with public transport, I have brought an image from Vienna, which is actually the main railway station of Vienna. I think that the railway is going to be one of the modes benefiting from the crisis within the next 2 to 3 years, specifically also because it will take a while until people start flying again. So the first thing that I will be looking into is public transport when it comes to reimagining our cities after the crisis. So my first point is, when it comes to public transport, you have to mix and match, which means you have to mix and match different modes with each other, and you have to realize that it is the mix that actually leads us to a successful mobility strategy. Of course, public transport will still be the backbone of urban mobility strategies, but we have to depathologize it. Because at the current stage, many people are very reluctant to the use of public transport. And this is mainly because, of course, within public transport, it is very difficult to keep a distance of at least 1 meter to each other, especially within rush hour. Now, this means that we have to make public transport more attractive. And I personally believe, also starting from the example of Vienna, that for one thing, it's about investing in public transport. You have to extend the network, you have to densify the network, you have to densify the intervals. In Vienna, for instance, you have to walk only approximately 3 minutes until you reach the next station, and you never have to wait for longer than 5 minutes maximum within the denser parts of the city until public transport arrives. And this has led to a situation where throughout the virus crisis, public transport was still quite a successful model, and people have started using it again because it's a good deal. Talking about good deals, of course, it's also about the price. Now, Vienna has an excellent deal when it comes to public transport because in Vienna, the annual card costs 365 euro per year, which means that for €1 per day, you can go anywhere. So it is highly competitive to private car use, even in post-virus times. But still, once again, I think that it is about investment and it is about the combination of both issues. So it's densifying intervals, densifying the network, and it's once again about the price. And it's about rethinking our thematic concepts and master plans around mobility. I will just give one example, what I believe is crucial when it comes to public transport. We're all used to cities that have rush hours. And I believe that the takeaways from the crisis with regard to reimagining our cities and public transport in the future is realizing that right now, with many people in home office mode, you do not need to actually think of public transport in terms of dense intervals at rush hour. You have to densify intervals throughout the day, and you have to actually talk to stakeholders, example given large corporations, because nobody actually needs to start working at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, or whatever it is. You could actually have people starting to work at starting to go to work, and of course schools also starting at different times. So you actually can avoid rush hour the way we have been experiencing it before. Now, the next takeaway, I think, is that while reopening our cities, we all go away, move away from stay home to stay in the neighborhood. But what does this actually really mean? I mean, look at this. This is public housing in Vienna. So if I were to stay home, I would love staying home there. Okay, just to give you an example what social housing in Vienna looks like today, I would stay home there as well, quite easily. And this is actually subsidized housing. But when we move to staying in the neighborhood, we realize how important green spaces are, how important it is to provide ample space for children to play and move around freely, just to give you an example. How important it is, this is yet another example of a new urban quarter in Vienna. The backdrop is also subsidized housing, and the lake you can see right here is an artificial lake. How important it is to produce new urban quarters where people love to stay and spend perhaps even summer vacation there if they cannot move around freely. I think that it is quite easy to, let's say, withstand quarantine in such neighborhoods. And here, once again, I have just brought you a few examples that I will flip through very quickly of the importance of vast, accessible green spaces that are there not only for the people that live there, but for the entire vicinity to be used in the times of recovery right now. And I think this is the direction we should be moving towards, and this is what we should be investing public money into. This is what it looks actually right now, the master plan that I have shown you before. It's already been built, and this is just yet another example of this type of urban quarters. And here's a rendering of a new urban quarter that is being constructed right now. And this is yet another master plan for the future. And it leads me to the third takeaway. It's about rethinking the street. I think that what we have to realize is that there are people that live in new urban quarters, but there are also people that live in the old parts of the city. And the places for life within the old parts of the city is the street. And the street is not only there for mobility, it is also there for life. and it's about reallocating space right now, and it's about resetting priorities, and it's about what Jane Jacobs once said, that the outside of the buildings is the inside of the city. It's realizing that this is where urban life materializes. This is where we go out and spend time, and this is what is decisive about whether we love our cities and our lifestyles or not. So, yet another provocative picture from old times. If it cannot look like this, it may look like this. It's about giving space, for instance, for outdoor sitting, for restaurants and cafes, because this is where we will be spending time in the next years. It's about introducing new uses and reallocating space for little markets, just to give you an example. This is an example of a self-organized market from the residents of this neighborhood in Vienna. It's just an example of new uses. As a matter of fact, I wanted to tell you, in Vienna, we have been fighting food trucks, for instance, because we thought that this is a over-commercializing of public space, and that was right. But in the new times, I think that food trucks and food canteens may be a good way to provide life quality for people that do not want to spend time indoors. It's about staying flexible and enabling pop-up and temporary uses. This is an example of the Viennese play streets. And it's about culture outside, outdoors. I mean, what about cinemas? And what about music? Does it always have to be inside? Does it always have to be indoors? We can arrange it in a different way. Just examples of, once again, these are all pictures from before, right? So you may imagine them even with a greater distance, but it just shows how life will, outdoor life and the importance of public space in our cities is going to grow, I believe, a lot. And it's about the bottom-up city. Now, this is my third take. So, if we have to spend our summer in the neighborhood, we would rather spend it this way. So what you can here see is the Viennese community grant scheme, where people may receive up to 4,000 euro if they have an idea of how to transform the face of their neighborhood. And the only precondition is that it has to be open and accessible to everybody for use without having to consume anything. And these are just examples of what has been done with this all over Vienna. Already up to now, more than 300 such initiatives have been implemented. And I think that this type of going about organizing life in the city, within the city, is going to get more important. And this is just a very simple example of how to go about it. So it's also about making room for other uses of the street and thinking in networks. This is the fourth takeaway. So creating new public spaces. This is a terrace that has been created as a new park in a very dense area in Vienna over the metro. This is what it looks like at night. And as a matter of fact, this was a silent party. And it's about well, in Vienna, let me also explain, 50% of all spaces are green spaces. We want to keep it this way, but it's not just about how much green space you have. It's about connecting the nodes. It's about thinking in networks. So in our case, we have decided that we want every Viennese to be able to access the green spaces in Vienna within 300 meters from any point within the city maximum, which means that we're about to create a network of green and open spaces that are interconnected with green boulevards, so as to produce this kind of city that I'm talking about. And I think this gets more and more important right now in the crisis. It means, of course, being able to spend time outdoors yet once again and enjoy life. It means realizing that such places as the one that I'm showing you right now are places for life once again, and for spending the summer, and you have to provide access to the water to everybody and not just to the people owning villas along the river, which is the case in Vienna. And of course, it means rethinking the street once again. This is what our longest shopping boulevard looked like a few years ago. This is what it looks like today. So it's providing space for walking and cycling and spending time outdoors. This is an example of a street that we turned into shared space. Yet another example of how to go about producing extra space within very dense parts of the city. As a matter of fact, a speed limit of 20 kilometers per hour is actually obligatory in shared spaces in Vienna. So this is just an example of how to rearrange, reorganize, let's say, public life in public space and reuse the street, though still allowing for private car use. And there's a whole program of redoing streets right now. So what you can see here in the back is what the street looks like a year ago and what it looks like today. So to move on, and this is my last takeaway, it's also about the little shop around the corner. So I think that strengthening local trade gets more and more important to all of us, which of course means combining it to mobility, that it is about thinking very intensely about the last mile of deliveries and also combining it with new smart technologies that will allow us, for instance, to be able to order something from the shop around the corner and have a neighbor bring it to us. This can be all done by the use of smart apps. And there are several examples of how this may work, but I think cities have to invest in this, collaborating with the Chamber of Commerce, to give you an example, locally, in order to produce this kind of delivery chains that are needed. And last but not least, it's about creating also, it's about production locally. It's about whatever can be done and produced locally. So this is an example of community farming in Vienna, as we know it everywhere. I think it's going to get more and more important. And this is an example of a new urban quarter that is being constructed right now. And what you can here see is roofs, not only providing water, so it's opportunities for swimming. This is all subsidized housing in Vienna, but also additional public spaces and spaces for gardening and local production. Just examples and a little bit of teasing as to which direction we should be moving towards. So once again, I think that it's about healthy city design. It's about realizing the importance of public spaces, and it's about realizing that creating cities around the needs of children and the needs of every generation, which means being able to move around freely, to play, to grow up in a safe environment, to have contact to nature, to have perhaps contact to water, means actually transforming our cities and producing the qualities we all need and love. And I think that the crisis, if we move in this direction, may also be an opportunity of creating the cities that we all love to live in, and live because we love to and not because we have to. And thanks for listening.
Maria, can I thank you for that tour de force that makes us all want to press a button and end up in Vienna. It really was stunning. But of course, we've been lucky in Ireland over the last many weeks that we've had extraordinarily good weather. And I think if we blur our eyes slightly, we would think certainly at certain times that we are we are in this these extraordinary scenes that you have painted. Just to remind you all, we've lots of questions in the Q&A, and I just realized that you can now upvote your questions if you want. That wasn't available at the start of the webinar. So if you want to run, if anybody in the audience wants to run through those questions and upvote any of them, they will naturally rise to the top of the pile. I think we've over 300 people tuned in at the moment, so we have a huge amount of people both listening and commenting. In the chat box we have hundreds of comments already. So just to kick things off, we've had quite a few questions in there, but several of the speakers, several of you have talked about the skills base, and maybe a question to kick things off, Lorraine, to you. Everyone has talked about the need to have a good skills base within towns and within cities. Is that all, or do we need regulatory changes, or do we need priorities in how things get done or what gets moved first? And Lorraine, from the position you're in the academic world, do you think we need more than the skills base, or is that key to realizing the kind of vision that we've seen in all four of your presentations?
So what I think in relation to the skills base is that traditionally we've had a very kind of disjointed local authority structure where, you know, the engineers had like control of the roads and the planners had, you know, control of other elements, and there wasn't as much cross-sectoral thinking and working, and the funding structure from national government has kind of has enabled that as well. And and while there has been increasing emphasis in more recently on you know, doing more multidisciplinary teaching, multidisciplinary work, engagement, there's still a large cohort of people working within the built environment, whether it be in local authority, national government, but also in consultancy, who were trained in the old ways and learnt, and everything was normalized in the old ways. So I think what we need to do is to really emphasize, you know, the point I made at the end about, you know, the communication piece. Communicating with each other and acknowledging and respecting each other's skill sets and knowing where our own limitations lie and when to call in the experts in another element of that, whether it be engagement with public engagement, whether it be kind of translating academic research into practical action. Yeah, I think that would be key. But like, again, and like any behavior change, because that would result in a behavior change, or that would be a behavior change, is there needs to be a nudge, and that nudge may be that they I know it was done in relation to like applications for funding around the DMRs when we brought out a design manual from urban roads and streets, that you had to have your multidisciplinary team, and to access the funding you had to be showing that you were doing that engagement and bringing in the different groups. I think that'd be a good start.
Yeah. Interesting. And then the issue of neighbourhood came up very strongly, Maria, in your own presentation. But there was a question that came in by email. Is it possible to implement measures that reduce the balkanization of cities, the fragmentation? And Jill, I might throw this one over to you, because I think there is potential with cycling to not just improve, you know, the local route to school, but to make sure that cities are better connected. Do you have any thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I didn't talk about today is that connectivity between cities and things. The Eurovelo network, for example, which some of you may have heard of, is, you know, about 16, 17 cycle routes that span Europe, and it's initiatives like these that really help, you know, get more cycling going, not only in the inner urban areas, but between cities. And they're not just for leisure or cycling tourism, but, you know, I do think that's an important part of it. If we really want to replace car travel, then you have to have these longer distance and connectivity cycle routes. And when infrastructure projects of any type are being considered, we have to make sure we don't cut off existing routes, which sometimes happens, you know, between cities and things.
Thanks for that. And quite a few questions in there, and people are busy upvoting and downvoting within the chat rooms. I have a question here at the top of that list, and I might throw it both to maybe Maria first and then to Sheila. How do you get buy-in from public representatives on taking the steps you need to take when the public are slow to uptake on radical change, and it can be difficult to get the funds when we're entering what may be a prolonged recession or depression? But on that issue of how do you get that buy-in, Maria, maybe first yourself and then over to Sheila.
Well, I believe that, to put it in simple terms, when you redesign cities the way I've been talking about, it can be done within a very short period of time and on a very low budget, as opposed to large investment in really big infrastructures that politicians love, because, you know, it's a chance in a lifetime to open this, but most of the times you never get there. So in the end, let's say redoing a street can be done within 1 year's time and for, you know, peanuts as compared to the budgets of cities. Whereas extending a metro line, just to give you an example, will take at least, at the best, 10 years and billions of investment. So this is what I've been always using as an argument to say it's not either or. It's like redoing cities this way is a quick win. And at the same time, you know, you can actually invest in public transport and real big investment and create thousands of working places. But you really need something that you can show to the people tomorrow. And this works.
Sheila, do you have any thoughts? I think in Ennis, you're really focusing on the positive. And do you think that's helping to get a broad support within the council chamber as well as from the public?
We're a very new group, I have to say, but I do feel we've had very good support from local media and from Clare Public Participation Network also. I'd have to echo with what Maria was saying also, is sometimes interventions don't need to cost the earth, and there is value in being very nimble and timely and trying out different interventions and then evaluating them and seeing how people react, with the view to saying, let's try it out, evaluate it, improve on it. There should be no like, this is permanence. You know, let's see how things go and improve all the time. And I think collaboration is key. Very often we feel that the business voice is very strong in Ennis, and rightly so. You know, the streets are not, business need lively streets, and lively streets need business too. So I would feel it's very interconnected, and that we would feel it needs to be in a collaborative process. And as I mentioned, just solution focused, you know, that yes, there will be things that we would see that we need improvement on, but that we should offer solutions for that. And just the point that, you know, it's important that public spaces aren't solely business spaces, that they are communal and cooperative spaces. And people are very accommodating. Like, we know that restaurants and pubs will need to use our outdoor spaces. And by the same token, the businesses know that people have to physically distance to move around safely in the town. So I think it will bring all voices together. I think there is huge opportunity now. Like, for example, in the past, people, quite a few businesses in Ennis town were against the idea of pedestrianisation. But when you actually talk to people and get the nuance of what they're for and what they're against, we can agree on filtering the traffic from our main streets during the day. At the moment, we're allowing the traffic through in the evening time. And so it's important to be very clear as to what you intend to do to bring people along with you. Yeah, so I think I think positivity does achieve something a little. You can
Yeah.
criticize in a positive manner as long as there's solutions, but it is important to bring people along with you. And I think most people realize most people's intentions are good. They want improvements. Sometimes it's the fear of change and just they're happy the way things are. And until you try something out and see how it goes, then, they'll prefer to stay in their usual, prefer to keep the lanes as they are.
Thanks, Sheila.
Kieran, can I come in briefly on that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, please do.
From an engineering perspective, we would always say that the best time to invest in infrastructure is during any kind of economic downturn or any kind of slowdown, because we have less traffic on the road, so we can get things done quicker and better. And we're also stimulating the economy by having people working in that space. And construction is quite often very badly hit with a downturn, so it keeps movement in that space. But also then, when things pick back up, we're ready for it. And with the last recession, we found that we weren't ready for it because we hadn't put in what was planned, and then we ended up with massive congestion in the M50, and we didn't have the public transport alternatives ready for people. Hopefully, we won't have a prolonged recession or downturn now, but there are things that we can do quick and fast. As Maria was saying, it can be our streets, but also our bus network. And I think, one thing I did notice during the full lockdown, or even though it wasn't full lockdown, but the quietening, was how frequent the bus was running. Now, it was just keeping to timetable. We have a really good frequent bus network in Dublin. It just gets stuck and clogged. So maybe and some of the issues people have in relation to using public transport right now are that fear of crowding, that fear of unreliability, being stuck in a space. And if we have a reliable and frequent public transport system, we're going to help alleviate that. We are going to have crowding anywhere that is so Lewis's and Darts, because we don't have so many of them, they're oversubscribed, we will have crowding. But if we only improve certain streets, we're also going to have that crowding on those streets too. So we need to have a full network, and that is what the flexibility the bus gives us as well.
Thanks for that, Lorraine. Actually, a question came in just directed for yourself. How would you rate the overall level of knowledge and awareness of urban design and livability in the Irish media? And I might then go on to either Jill or Maria on that question, because it's always a real challenge as to whether the debate is there in the public forum, in the media. And maybe just starting with Ireland and moving on to perhaps Brussels or the rest of Europe. Firstly, to you, Lorraine, how would you rate the overall level of knowledge and awareness of urban design and livability in the Irish media? And do you have any ideas for improving that knowledge and awareness?
What I think we have is quite a lot of specialists. We do have some specialists, and they're in niche areas within our media. They're not necessarily on our main channels, and they do, like RTE in particular, have been producing some absolutely fantastic pieces. Through their nationwide programs, through their EcoI, through the general news programming. But for talk show radio type media, there's a lot more trying to get a kind of an angle, a push, and and I have found that when they've spoken to me about potentially going on a show, I get dropped, when they hear that I want to get everyone talking together, so I think, the media, I think, and I suppose that's what I was saying around the responsibility in how they but I think there is knowledge there. It could be better. And what we're telling our students is to think about the sound bite when they're producing research, because that's what media pick up on. Have that nice narrative where you can get a conversation going.
Really interesting. Jill, do you think from the cities you've lived in Europe, from Brussels or from other cities, how do you find that public debate evolving?
Yeah, I also think that, controversy or, a bit of argy-bargy sells, much better than, very, academic kind of discussions and things. So, emotion and getting people of different opinions. One thing I've observed in Belgium, for example, so there was a lot of attention paid to these 40 kilometers of pop-up cycle paths and things that have, are in the process of being created all around the city. And you know what you're starting to hear now is the backlash. So whether it's you know Flemish politicians saying all the people from Flanders who come into Brussels by car every day, this is discriminating against them, and you know, so you know I think they're always looking for the counterpoint, the thing that you know makes it an interesting debate and interesting to watch. And you know, I do find it frustrating sometimes that the level of debate and the things they choose to focus on are maybe not quite, you know, what we would want, but it's always trying to find what is that soundbite, what is the message, how can we get that across and really get people behind it. So that's the challenge of advocacy, isn't it? You know?
Yeah. Maria, do you find that the trying to find common ground works, or do you have to have a row or two in all of this?
Well, I would say I've been experiencing a swift, let's say a cultural change in Vienna. In the beginning, when we started pedestrianizing and converting streets into shared space, it's been a huge controversy. In the meantime, I think that everybody has been able to test and find out what it means in terms of everyday life quality. Everybody has found out how much this has meant to everybody throughout the lockdown, because once again, we were allowed to use public space. We had to just keep 1.5 meters distance to each other. But then, you know, realizing that being able to get out in front of your door and find a green space or an open space, as a matter of fact, that can be used was really equal to life quality, has changed perspective for many people. And within the media, I have found that actually they have been very supportive in terms of shared spaces and pedestrianizing after the crisis now. Also showing that actually crowding, and I have to agree with Lorraine into this, occurs where, you know, public spaces with high quality are existent, and that you have to have them in every neighborhood, in every district, so that people don't have to go where they can find actually space to spend time outdoors. But let me tell you one last thing. I really believe that, of course, we talk about brown recovery and green recovery, and we talk about different types of investment and everything. But in the end, it's about making people realize that it's about, do you prefer spend the rest of your life indoors or outdoors? And I know that this sounds extremely radical, but then either you just withdraw within your apartment or your little house in the countryside and your secluded walled garden and your car, and you believe that this is, and hold your breath, as a matter of fact, and you believe that this is the way you can spend life and stay safe, or you decide that you want to go outside, you want to meet your friends again, you want to be free again, you want to spend life outdoors, and you want to make the best of the times that are coming. And we all know that most probably the virus will be returning sometime in the autumn. So I think it's about letting people realize, you know, that withdrawing in our houses and cars is not the solution.
Thank you for that. Jill, there's a question in about the 20K. Is it working? Do you want to, in Brussels?
Inside
sorry,
that Pentagon.
Are people keeping to it, I guess?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. So fantastic. People walking in the middle of the street, because that's part of those new things imply, that the cyclists and pedestrians have priority. I didn't see many cars, to be honest. So I went there, and I think the traffic levels just aren't there again, that you're really kind of noticing the difference, but certainly the difference in terms of being able to cycle and walk there. But how that coexists along with cars, I think it's a bit early to tell.
Yeah, and there's another question I might ask you as well. Declan, excuse me, from Cork in Southern Ireland, is saying that city mobility is seen as a zero-sum game, the pedestrian versus the cyclist versus the car. So how did cities which successfully implemented cycling networks move the conversation from the kind of zero-sum game thinking?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, that's a very good question. I think there's been different approaches in different places. I mean, I guess, poster cities that are always looked up to in terms of having done this over a longer period of time are Copenhagen and Amsterdam as kind of the best examples of that. But how they actually did it, you know, I think in those two examples, it was over a sustained, you know, longer period of time, lots of investment, you know, cycle bridges, you know, you name it. I think what we're talking about now is quite different. It's, you know, very, very quick to introduce something in a pop-up kind of way. I mean, I read a quote the other day, they were interviewing about how they did that in Berlin, and they were saying normally it could take up to a decade to get a new proper cycle path somewhere, and some of those pop-up ones were done either overnight or in 3 days. So, you know, I think the political will is very different at a time like this, which means it really is an opportunity. We're talking about get that temporary lane in there, then let's see what we can do to, you know, if you build it, they will come, and then let's do what we can to make that permanent.
Yeah. I want to come back to the issue of nudging, because that came up a couple of times, and there's a few questions. I see one there from Zoe, wondering how do we get to that kind of stage 5 that you identified, Lorraine? Do you see a kind of a tipping point, or is it just a gentle push of people who have the power to make a difference?
There is such a thing as a tipping point. There is a point at which where a behavior becomes normalized, when it is accepted this is something that people do and I can do it too. And then the term is self-efficacy, a belief that an individual can do this. And that is an important part of getting to that point. But modeling is really important. That's that other people are doing this. So around schools, that the teachers are also cycling to school or walking into the school, they are taking public transport. That our politicians do this. And we have to as well remember that what works as a nudge will differ between different areas, in particularly different socioeconomic groups and different cultural groups. So we have one size doesn't fit everybody, because I kind of show that hierarchy of different influences on behaviors, in particular physical activity behaviors. And there are some cases where things have to be approached differently. And I think in particularly the Women on Wheels project and Antashka Green Schools projects recently around girls cycling and women cycling, I think have been really influential in that space, because they're even just having a narrative for people to be aware. Just that awareness alone sometimes is a major piece. But I think one of the biggest nudges in relation to transportation behavior change will come from the fact when people realize that other people are moving faster than them by a different mode. So like people will revert into their car when they think they see cars, they perceive that cars are going faster than them. If you're walking and you were stuck waiting at a pedestrian light, and I'm delighted Dublin City Council have done it, at least include, you know, decrease the wait time. There's like, you know, if you're constantly there waiting and seeing everyone else go by while you're standing, especially if it's wet and cold, then you're going to go, oh, do you know what, I'll just get my car, I'm using my car. But if you're sitting in your car and the public transport is zooming past you, and the pedestrians, you're seeing loads of them getting past you, and the cyclists are going past you, well then you might be encouraged, and that might be the nudge.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sheila, I want to give you a sticky question. I'm getting a bit of grief on Twitter from the car drivers. You know, it's all very well for you, living in the middle of town, etc., etc. And this narrative comes up all the time. But I'm sure in Ennis, it's an issue of people who are driving into Ennis from far away. And is there, you know, any magic wand that can say to people, look, you don't have to actually bring your car into the middle of the shop you're going to. Perhaps you'd park it a little bit away. Do you have any tips on that issue?
Well, that's exactly one question that we got. You know, we understand you wanted the town nice for walking and cycling, and what about drivers? So of course we want to improve the life of everyone. So our reply is, surely with the level of traffic congestion in town, you can see that if people walk and cycle, or they can choose to walk and cycle, that the traffic congestion into the town will be reduced significantly. And surely if the speed limits are reduced around town, it's safer for everyone. So we're not essentially, like, Ennis is a county town, and a lot of people travel from, you know, the smaller towns and villages around. Rural transport is severely lacking, to be honest, and we do have train connections with Limerick and Galway and onto Dublin and onto Cork. But it would be better if we had a more extensive rural transport around Clare, and there's controversy at the moment over the rural bus connection there. But the argument is that you can drive to a certain, like if you're coming from outside in, you can drive to a certain point and then you can walk and cycle the rest of the way. Like a lot of competition at the moment for businesses is from online shopping and deliveries, and also outlet stores. So let's take Kildare Outlet Store, for example, which will be a town in our, a contrived shopping outlet area in Kildare. And we see that people park their cars, then they walk into the outlet store. The surfaces are all very level and clean. Everything is kept very well. There's outdoor seating, there's greenery. It's all very pleasant. It's kept very well. And so if the same effort was put into our own towns and villages and neighbourhoods within Dublin, that would essentially revitalise local business without taking it outside to kind of larger international outlets, but rather focus on the small family-run local business too. We've kind of gone off the point there actually on the drivers.
But nonetheless.
Yeah, just an additional point to what Lorraine was talking about is when they see the, people cycling and walking faster than the car, surely that's an incentive. And I know Dr. Rachel Aldridge talked about Vassilakou, Dublin. She talked about, it's also about how local authorities prioritise in, for example, roadworks. So rather than closing off the cycle lane or the path to do the roadworks, close off a lane of traffic. Make the cycle lanes and paths so beautiful, like absolutely aesthetically pleasing, with greenery, nice surface, really clean. And let people envy the people who are walking and cycling. Let not the envy go the opposite way. Oh, somebody's driving in that, nice warm car. Oh no, look at how pleasant their journey is in. So I think we do need to be ambitious. We do need to have pleasant and green and just really comfortable and safe active travel infrastructure. So that's the choice. That's what people want to do. With loads of little interesting things to see along the way. Like Ennis is an absolutely lovely town with massive potential, but we have given over a lot of our even though we have 2 multi-story car parks, we have given over a lot of our town and an awful lot of our riverfront to surface car parking.
Yeah. Thanks, Sheila. Lots of interesting information there. I see on Twitter they want you in Limerick. They like what you're doing in Ennis, so they'd love to get your
train journey away.
expertise down there. So that's the next stop. I think your point about the public realm is so important, that we have to maintain the public realm to the kind of standards that people would expect if they walk into a shopping centre or a shopping mall. And I think we need to aspire to not just the maintenance, but the improvement and the management. We're coming to a close, but I do want to ask each of the panelists to just give a short concluding statement or a few words if they have one. Just for those who are listening, we will make available the video, the recording of the webinar, and we will share that with everybody who signed up. So you'll be able to look at the video of the webinar subsequently. If you want to keep the conversation going on Twitter, the hashtag Reimagining Cities is what we're using this evening. I think when I look at the 70 questions out there, I think we could almost do a weekly radio show on this to keep the conversation going. But of course, we can't do that for the moment. But I might maybe just ask you all for a last word. Maria, maybe if you've any. Oh, actually, Maria, the €365 annual transport pass. People are so jealous of that. They're paying €120 as students to travel into Dublin for a month. Can you tell me a little bit more about where the money for that subsidised transport fare comes from?
Well, actually, we have invested the additional money on behalf of the city of Vienna, but that was not as much as everybody thinks it was. So it took us approximately 3 years, and within these 3 years, we had to invest approximately €30 million per year But after that, so many additional people bought annual cards that were not using public transport before, that the whole the whole reforming of everything paid off for itself. So this is the answer to that.
Yeah.
And look, I think that what I would like to say in the end is just this. I mean, everything that we've been talking about has been there already. So if you look into best practices of cities within the last years, you will see that there have been congestion charges, there have been private car traffic restrictions and limitations, like, for instance, in Italy with zona traffico limitato, where you have to pay if you want to enter the downtown parts of the city. And you have to know it in advance, right? So that you can get a permit. There have been every kinds of different types of ways to arrange traffic calming within the inner parts of city. And of course, there has been a renaissance of public spaces and a new way of realizing that the cities we love are cities that we can use differently, and that the streets are there for life and not just for moving around. And if you look deeper into how cities have coped, with the virus crisis, you will see that the cities that have already disposed of infrastructure for cycling and walking, and wonderful public spaces, have been able to cope better with the crisis than the cities that do not dispose of such infrastructures. So in the end, it's about realizing that it is also about infrastructures. Yes, of course, this is infrastructure as well. And this is investment, and this is working, this is jobs. This is everything we're talking about. And it's an opportunity to create cities that we love. So I think we have to move into this direction. And in terms of looking into the future, we have to look into the data of cities that already have wonderful infrastructure in this respect and how they have been able to cope with the crisis and compare it. Of course, this is not one directional. There are several factors, right? But you still have to look deeper into this. And I think that there's going to be a very clear learning out of this. And the second thing is that when arguing about the city of the future, I think there are a few new arguments that come into place in addition to the old ones we all know about. It's about a healthy city. It's about healthy new lifestyles. It's about air quality. And it's about avoiding congestion, which has always been actually something that comes at a high economic cost. But right now, there come additional issues to this. And in the end, and I always have to say this once again, it's about realizing what is your future lifestyle. Is your future lifestyle within your four walls, indoors, in your car, indoors, and having everything brought to you by delivery trucks, and being delivered at a safe distance in front of your front door? Or is it about enjoying life? And I think that the answer to this is clear.
Lovely, Maria. Thank you for that. Jill, do you have any final thoughts?
Beyond saying thank you for inviting me today, and I just think safety. I would leave the message with safety. I mean, what's the biggest reason why people might be reluctant to do more cycling, and it's their perceived safety. So I think if we can focus on that going forward, that's a really powerful argument. I saw some of the questions in the chats, relating to what would you do to push that, and I think the safety aspect is really, really important.
Thank you for those words. Sheila, do you have any last thoughts or advice to us all?
Obviously, we're all really jealous of Vienna. Pretty sure. I think I'd like to say that we need to reach beyond our echo chambers. And if we're truly trying to be inclusive about our public realm and our public spaces, that we need to talk to people that are not in our echo chamber. You know, people outside of, people outside of our disciplines, and people of different ages and people of different abilities and different genders. And that we should never presume that we should never presume what they think, and we should never presume that they'll disagree with us. We should never presume that they know less. Everyone has something to contribute, and if we listen to them, it kind of brings a value to our society, and it brings a value to how we in turn can message and communicate what we're trying to do. So yep, include everyone would be my advice.
Thanks, Sheila. Lorraine, any closing words on all of this?
I suppose echoing a lot of what has been said there, I think that you know, and I suppose in light of, you know, as well, what there's been a lot of conversation around, you know, refinding ourselves in this time of COVID and calming down and, you know, reconnecting with ourselves. The reconnecting with our local neighborhoods, I think, is vitally important here, because first of all and most basically, the supporting local business supports our local economy, supports our local jobs, supports everyone in our community, and then also like validates for people who want to invest more in a community and open a local business. If they see that footfall, there'll be more incentivization to do that. And but also those local trips, because I think we've had such a focus for years on the commute, and that commute has actually severed communities. There's a lot of our urban villages that are just driven through. We have, and there's a lot of very bad connections between adjacent urban villages and villages. Like, and when I use the term village, I mean rural, I mean town, I mean city. The connection between them, that some of them have been quite badly severed, and there's you know, and there's theories out there, and that, you know, at a level makes sense that these were indeed gendered, but unintentionally. I would think that those that were involved in a lot of the kind of the transport planning, route planning, were sitting in that traffic every day going into work. So when you were sitting down at your desk going, what problem do I need to solve? You were thinking about that commute. And so, you know, we're trying to get people into the city faster. And but that led to that disconnection of the local communities. And that affected the trips to school. That affected those local shopping trips, where people then said, it's easier for me to sit in my car than deal with the hassle in my local neighborhood. But if we can refocus on that, get that right, and taking that school traffic off the road, because we know there's peaks at school time, like, and addressing people locally being able to get to school and making that safe will ease a lot of the traffic too, and allow for a better flow of public transport, and those that need to drive, that they can still drive and that they have a better experience because the traffic can flow. But it's making the most sustainable and most healthy choice the easiest choice, and the most affordable choice, and the most equitable choice for everybody. And again, like, bringing back Socio Economics has a major role to play in here as well. And a lot of trips, again, on the fringes of our cities, the most lower to paid work is on the fringes of the city, which is the areas that are least served by public transport. And they're also where the lowest cost housing is in our suburbs. And so but we don't provide for those suburb to suburb trips, but people are getting into a poverty cycle and needing to be able to buy a car. And know that from my own PhD work, that were families, the lowest income families were the ones that were spending most per capita, or most of their household spend on fuel and car, compared to other neighborhoods. So yeah, bringing it back to that, and I suppose for everybody to check their perspective, because like what I was saying there about that focus on the commute into the city, that was very much someone's just a viewpoint because of what they were familiar with. And we all view everything to do with the built environment through our own veil, our own perspectives and our own norms. And that I think Sheila mentioned it, Maria and Jill, we've all mentioned it, I think, that thinking about everybody and especially the most vulnerable in society, the old people and the young people, and those that are at home and spending most time in that community, and making sure that they're well served.
Thanks, Lorraine, for that. And certainly, I think the point about getting out of the echo chamber, working on this together, is crucial to moving ahead. So look, can I just sincerely thank you, the panelists, for fantastic contributions this evening. Can I thank everybody who signed up and tuned into the webinar? I really want to acknowledge your participation, your questions and your thoughts in the chat. We will be making available the webinar as a video. We'll probably put it up on YouTube so that you can watch it. I want to thank my staff, Michelle, who worked very hard in the background to make all of this happen. And, you know, looking ahead in my capacity as an MEP, we will see development certainly in the autumn on sustainable mobility coming from the European Parliament. So I'm looking forward and I'm hopeful that we will see some good developments there. I think, you know, just as we close off the webinar, I think we have to remember with great sadness the 2 million people who have been infected by COVID-19 in Europe, the 170,000 people who have lost their lives in Europe, and almost 1,300,000 worldwide. I do know that some of you who tuned in this evening have lost loved ones in recent weeks to COVID-19. But I do think in the midst of all this sadness and grief, there is an opportunity to reshape the world. And I think we'll have to give the last word to Jane Jacobs, as Maria quoted, and I'm paraphrasing so I don't have it right, but we do have to think of the public realm, the outside space, as being our living room. We can work wonders to improve it and make our towns and cities healthier and happier places to be. So thank you all for being with us this evening, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. All the best.